Hi there to everyone in this breakout session. I'll wait a couple of more minutes before starting with this session because I want to give everyone transitioning from the one room to the other the chance to participate in this meeting. Let's say we wait for about 2 minutes.
So, hello everybody. Hello Linda. My name is Anita Poort. I work in the team Strategic Procurement of the C2 Public Procurement within DG Grow. Welcome everybody. We are waiting till everybody is arriving to this link. So Linda can start her presentation. We will first do the presentation and then open the floor up to questions. We ask you to use Slido for your questions and I will read them to Linda so she can answer the questions. So Linda, I think it's about time to start your presentation, so we have a lot of time left, hopefully, to answer questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you, Anita. And also thank you for everyone joining this breakout session. In this session, I'll be talking about the political framework of digital rights in Amsterdam that actually kind of paved the way for these procurement conditions I just talked about. At the end of the session, I hope to answer as many questions you have on what this could mean for the public buyer. Anita, I'm not sure, but I think something just went wrong with the slides. Yeah, there they are again.
It's back again. Great. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. And you're on the right slide already. Thanks. In the previous session, I already mentioned the policy framework for technology in the city of Amsterdam, and I explained that we have a people-centered approach to technology. In this session, I'll explain a bit more about what I mean by that, why it is so important, and also what this means for AI and algorithms. And I will also end with some practical tips on how to implement the procurement conditions for trustworthy AI within your organization. Next slide, please. Our digital city agenda is built upon two values that are very important to Amsterdam and actually to me personally as well. And that's freedom and inclusion. Freedom, first of all, is about being able to be yourself without restriction, without restricting, of course, the freedom of others. It's about freedom of speech, freedom to be in the public space, freedom to think for yourself. And technology can help these freedoms, but it can also limit them, of course. And in Amsterdam, we want you to choose the first. Next slide. Inclusion, then, inclusion to us means that the city belongs to everyone. Knowledge, information, and education should be available to everyone. Again, technology can be very helpful in that regard, connecting people to each other and giving access to endless information. But at the same time, many technologies can create a division between those who understand it and those who don't, those who can afford it and those who don't, and those who can make it and those who don't. Now, let me give some examples of how technology can be used to limit freedom and inclusion or to actually better freedom and inclusion. And for that, I brought two more examples of algorithms in Amsterdam. Next slide, please. The first example is the public eye algorithm. Amsterdam can be a very busy city with cars and bikes and people in the street. Anita, the next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. And some days, some places can be so busy that we need crowd control for public safety. For instance, temporarily closing off a certain street during King's Day, when the whole streets are full of orange clothed people, to redirect the flow of people. So we want to monitor how busy some notoriously crowded places are. Now, we could do this in a very intrusive way. For instance, use biometric identification to follow your every move through the city. The technology is there to do so, in theory. We don't want to do that. Instead, we use an algorithm to count the amount of people in an area without using any personal information. The public eye algorithm was trained to recognize a human head as a human head, regardless of its exact shape or color, or if someone wears a hat, for instance. And importantly, it doesn't recognize faces. So it can count the amount of heads in an area and send that number to the city's crowd control people. And furthermore, we make this data available to the public in real time, so people themselves can choose to avoid crowded places. That also helps. Next slide, please. The second example is our 1.5 meter monitor. As you all know, because of COVID-19, it's important that people keep social distance. In the Netherlands, we generally say 1.5 meter. To help raise awareness, we created this monitor. It's a kind of digital mirror, actually, where you see a direct reflection of the situation in front of the big screen with an overlay of smileys. So you get a green smiley for a person more than 1.5 meters away from the next person, or an orange smiley if the distance is 1.5 meter, between 1.5 meter and 1.8 meters. And a red smiley for less than 1.5 meters distance. So by using an algorithm that can detect people in the video image and calculate the distance, it calculates these smileys. Now we could, of course, use this system for law enforcement, maybe even give people a fine if they're too close to each other. But of course, that's not what we want. This system is nothing more than a communication tool, reminding people in its field of vision to keep their distance. The system does not store any visual information or send it to city officials. It's just a direct link between the camera on top of the screen and the screen itself, with a smiley filter in between. So what I've tried to illustrate with these two examples is that governments have a choice. They have a choice how to deploy their technology, and in particular their AI and algorithms. And in Amsterdam, we feel that that should be done with respect for what we call digital rights. Next slide, please. Now, what do we mean by digital rights? First, it's good to mention that there's 5 specific digital rights that Amsterdam and all the cities in the International Cities Coalition for Digital Rights have committed to upholding. It's these 5 rights you see here on the screen, and they include things like protection of privacy and data, as well as transparency and accountability, but also equal access to the internet. Next slide, please. But in the context of algorithms, I think it's good to see digital rights as a safeguarding of any human right. It's not just about privacy and data protection, but about never limiting freedom of speech, not programming unintentional prejudice or bias into a system, and about not restricting access to buildings for certain people because the algorithm in the automatic door doesn't recognize your skin color or your wheelchair. It's about freedom of thought. It's also about freedom of thought and freedom of choice, not manipulating people towards a certain opinion because your algorithm knows their preferences better than they know themselves. Next slide, please. I'm actually very adamant about these points. And that's why I really wanted to do something with this. So how do procurement conditions play their part in all this? For us, procurement conditions are a way to not only say we protect the digital rights of the people of Amsterdam, but to also act on it. They give us means to demand information from suppliers that would otherwise stay behind closed doors. That information gives the public the means to hold us accountable if we use algorithms in a way that is not in support of digital rights. Also, it lets us demand from suppliers that they should do everything in their power to prevent bias and to make sure an algorithm does exactly what it's supposed to do and doesn't have any negative side effects. So where does this leave you? Your organization doesn't necessarily, I guess, have a digital rights policy framework. Can you use the Amsterdam procurement conditions in your organization? Next slide, please. The short answer is yes. You can download our standard contractual clauses, which we now provide in a format that's super easy to adapt. You just put in the name of your organization, maybe a few specific examples to your organization if needed, and then you're good to go. I do have some recommendations that will help you along the way, of course. First of all, these conditions will only work, I think, if it's an agreement between the supplier and your organization. This doesn't mean that you can't be firm on your demands, but it's good to get their feedback and hear if there might be any obstacles for the supplier to conform with the conditions. We did this in Amsterdam and actually throughout the Netherlands, and I have to say that so far suppliers seem to find our conditions very reasonable. They understand that a government needs to have access to information about the algorithms they use. This might be different, of course, in your country or your situation. So go talk to your suppliers and involve also your buyers, your in-house developers, your privacy experts, and anyone else that can help you create conditions that anyone and everyone can get behind. Secondly, invest some time in understanding the definition of algorithmic system we use in the procurement conditions and know how to explain that definition to others. We use that broad definition, which is actually very much in line with the Commission's recently published definition within the AI regulation. As said, for us, an algorithmic system is any piece of software that uses data analysis, statistics, or self-learning logic to automatically produce some kind of prediction or advice. And we use this broad definition, which is not limited to black box algorithms or very complex AI, because any algorithmic system that is used in decision making can have a tremendous impact on citizen lives. It's not just the case for complex AI, that's also the case for simple business rules. But I found that you do need to explain that within your organization with a few examples in order to make that click. So that's my second tip. Thirdly, I don't know about your procurement processes or lead buyer situation, but in Amsterdam, we have specific buyers for IT. And this was once a very logical way of organizing procurement because IT systems were big systems run by specific IT departments. But of course, nowadays, IT and technology is also part of everyday life. And an algorithm used to help distribute social welfare benefits, for instance, won't be procured by the IT department, but by our social welfare department. That means that knowledge about the importance of safeguarding digital rights when using algorithms, as well as knowledge about these procurement conditions, should be available throughout the organization, not just the IT buyers. And lastly, and I hope this goes without saying, but if your organization not only procures AI, but also develops it in-house, then that AI should be held to the same requirements, which means thorough documentation and being transparent about the impact of the algorithm. But you can very easily use these procurement conditions for such guidelines for your organization. So the final slide, please, Anita. I sincerely hope that our work will inspire you to safeguard. I hope that our work will inspire you to put safeguards for digital rights on the use of algorithms, either through these procurement conditions or through instruments of your own. And I'm now very happy to take any questions you have. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this clarifications, Linda. We have promised this webinar will also be interactive, and we arrived to this interactive part. We already got some nice questions for you, and I will start with your first point of attention. There is a question from Erin, I don't know which organization, and he asked, how do you actually involve the suppliers in the discussions about the clauses? Maybe you can give some hands-on experience on that.
Yeah, sure. Um, I haven't found the holy grail for that question yet. It starts, of course, with talking to the suppliers, and especially maybe starting with finding one, two, or three suppliers that already have some idea about what algorithms are, and just talking about how these procurement conditions work and why they are important. And then you can collaborate with these suppliers to involve actually their colleagues, um, and yeah, get them involved not only in using the procurement conditions, but also, and that's I think a very important role for the um, oh, I'm so sorry. I understood this question as how do you involve the buyers? And now I see it's about supplier.
Yeah,
But
actually,
actually, the
is
answer is kind of the same, because you should just talk to the suppliers. So you can do that through the normal procurement process, right? You write out a tender and then you get feedback. That's a wonderful way. But you can also reach out to suppliers. Just send an email to some IT companies or some suppliers of algorithms and just ask them to think with you on these conditions. That's how we've done it, and that worked actually really well.
great, great. I see there are two questions from Maria, which don't know which organization, but maybe we take them together. She asks, how are privacy offers involved in this project, and what is the relationship between this project and the data strategy in your organization?
Yeah. So first of all, for the first question, what we really try to do with these procurement conditions is have a draft right away. So this is a topic where you can, of course, endlessly talk about what's the right thing to write down, and never end up with concrete conditions. So I actually started with Jeroen and also other experts, a small group of about 5 people, and we just drafted these conditions. Um, and then we asked all these different stakeholders, privacy officers, suppliers, anyone else who wanted to get involved. They all had a chance to get involved. We organized a big session. Actually many sessions, but we started with the one where there were about 30 of these people from all over the Netherlands. And we actually had very specific feedback on specific words, which was wonderful, and which led to this 1.0 version of the conditions. And then the relation with the data strategy of our organization, um, there of course is a relation, and at the same time it's a separate topic, because I mean algorithms need data to function, but we use data also outside of algorithms. The city has the task, for instance, to registrate people that come live in the city. So it's important to also have some specific, how do you say that, specific policy, and also I think conditions for the use of data in your organization. I hope that's an answer to the question.
Yes, that's very clear. I would like to remind the audience that they can ask questions through the Slido application. Just fill in your question there, and we will read it out loud. The next question I will go to is from Erin again. How do you maintain and update the clauses, and how do you ensure that they remain relevant and up to date during, especially during a contract?
Yeah, I love this question because it's a real head scratcher, of course. Let me start by how we do this within Amsterdam, and that's also how you can do it within your organization. Probably within your organization, you have a specific department that's in charge of contracts, or that's in charge of legal advice. And I'd say give them the responsibility to maintain the up-to-dateness of the standard contract, which also means sending them the feedback from suppliers. And then just very use very thorough, good communication when there's a new version that needs to be used, also towards the supplier, so they know what to expect. However, my ideal would not be that we all will be implementing these contractual clauses for ourselves. Only in the Netherlands, there's like 350 municipalities. We would be crazy to try to keep these clauses up to date with all this specific feedback. So I do think there's a need for some kind of standardization. Within the Netherlands, we're working on that. So we're trying to get these conditions to the level of the national policymaker. But I do really see a role for European policymakers to try to give at least some standardized or general guidelines on on how you should go about contractual clauses.
Thank you very much, Linda. That was a bit loud. I see a next question from Ariana. Which procurement instruments do you usually use to procure AE services? Do you use framework contracts? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think that's an important note to make. We, of course, already have many framework contracts in place. So we have our standard procurement conditions for for any procurement, and then also specific procurement conditions for IT. And there's also, of course, agreements already, so framework contracts for intellectual property rights. These contractual clauses do not change anything for those framework contracts. They go on top of that. So what they do really is make agreements on what information should be provided. So they are actually attached, kind of like an attachment to the standardized procurement conditions already available in the organization. But we do say we use them always, even if there's a chance of an algorithmic system being delivered by the supplier, because you don't know that at the start of the procurement always.
Okay. I see a next question coming in from Maranka Vieringa, Utrecht University. Linda, you distinguish between technical transparency and process transparency, which is very useful. How do you practically organize the process transparency? That is, do you follow a particular format, structured way to discuss and document this, and so forth? Is that also part of the procurement? Could you elaborate on that, Linda?
Yeah, thanks, Maranka, for the question. I love this one because, of course, if you would only implement these procurement conditions, there will be only a small step, of course. You then have information, and then what? So the short answer to Maranka's question is no, we don't have that in place yet, but we're building it. We started with the procurement conditions because they gave us clarity on what type of information we demand from the suppliers, but also what information needs to be documented within our own organization. And now we're working on more standardized ways of documenting. And there, of course, the EU regulation also helps tremendously because we now know which of the demands we already made for the supplier are also in the future probably demanded by EU law. So it is needed that such a structured way of documenting and also, how do you state it? Saving the documentation is needed. And then, of course, a structured way of publishing that documentation. And for that, in Amsterdam, we use the algorithmic register, where we not just open up the documentation, so we don't just put it online and see if you can use it. No, we try to explain also to citizens how this works. Let's see. I don't hear you, Anita, but I do see another
we're looking
question.
if there is more questions. Maria asking how many privacy officers were involved in this project, and maybe is privacy a big role plays a big role in this part of the classes? How do you work together with the privacy officers?
Yeah, actually, with privacy, it's the same as with intellectual property rights. So what we did there was we kind of established there is already GDPR. So we have already actually all the safeguards for privacy in place. And it would not be beneficial to make new arrangements within these within these procurement conditions for algorithmic systems, because we think there's not necessarily anything extra needed due to using an algorithm if you have the transparency and the accountability in place in the right way. So we we just figured GDPR is there, and these procurement conditions should help comply with GDPR in the best way we can. And then how many privacy officers were involved? I mean, I don't have a concrete number, but of that first big meeting of about 50 people, I think about a quarter might be a privacy officer or have some legal knowledge of privacy. And along the way, over the last year, I think it'll be more than 100 privacy officers from all over the Netherlands who have either written, helped write these conditions, or given their reflection, or given their thumbs up in some cases. So, yeah.
Thank you. And we have a very important question from Noirini Arken about what has been the feedback from citizens. And I think Norin means maybe the feedback on these clauses. Have they been shared with citizens, and what is their reaction to these contract clauses? I think that's the question, but if I'm wrong, please, Norin, correct me, then we can go on.
Yeah, I love this question. I can't say there has been a big reaction from citizens on these procurement clauses, but that's understandable, of course. It's a very legal document, and it's an agreement between the government and the supplier. But as said, these procurement conditions were not the only thing we were working on. They were part of a package of instruments for public control on AI. And the procurement conditions actually form the basis for what I mentioned before, our algorithmic register, where we provide the information that's provided by the supplier to the bigger public. And there, the feedback from citizens has been overwhelming. And I mean that just by not even sheer number, but the how do you say that, the depth of information. So some people were very critical about the register, some were very happy, but actually every piece of feedback we got, we could actually use. That shows me that there's a lot of interest in this topic, in knowing how AI works, but more importantly, how AI impacts you on a daily basis or in your daily life. So I think that's very important, and you should not just look at these procurement conditions as a means to have control on AI, because there's more than just making agreements with your suppliers. More is needed for that.
Thank you very much. Maybe also in relation to that former question, what is the level of political involvement, if any?
Yeah, well, it depends a bit what the one asking the question means by involvement, but what I have seen, I mean, we're a local government, right? So you always wonder, will the city council ask question about our policy? And there I was so positively surprised. There was an overwhelming interest of the city council in these instruments, and they actually really thought with us. So they also helped form the policy from that perspective of the last question. How do citizens get impacted? How can citizens get involved? So on the local level, there was a high level of political involvement, but now in the Netherlands, we also see on the national level a really big involvement. That's also due to kind of
Sorry, Linda, to interrupt you. I get here the message that we can return to the other link to proceed with the general agenda. I would like to thank everybody for the participation in this breakout session, and I would invite everybody to go to the web stream of the general link you have received in your email. And then we will close this web streaming and we come all together in the other web streaming link again. So thank you very much, and we will go to the conclusions and the wrap up in the general link. So please all switch to the other link you have received by mail, and I will see you there again. Bye Linda, bye everybody, see you soon.
Thank you, Anita.